Hello, and welcome to a Q&A session for the Shavasana Intensive Restorative Yoga digital course on www.lassiter.yoga. I'm Lizzie Lassiter, and joining us to answer all of our burning Shavasana questions is Judith Hanson Lassiter. Hi, Mama.
Hi, Lizzie.
For those of you taking the course, you know that the format is 21 days of rest and silence. Each day we're releasing a new short video or audio clip that will prepare you to practice Shavasana for 20 delicious minutes. And for those of you who haven't enrolled yet, I suggest you visit www.lassiter.yoga and you can watch a really short video about the course, and we're also offering a free trial. So, Mama, are you ready?
Yes, ma'am.
I sent out an email to everyone taking the course after 7 days of the 21-day project, and I just openly solicited questions. If people wanted to let me know how they were doing, let us know how they were doing, and I was so overwhelmed by the response. So much positive feedback and warmth from people who are practicing with us all around the world. Actually, speaking of around the world, I'm in India right now, and Mom's in San Francisco, so apologies if we have any audio quality difficulties. But the question I want to start with is from Pravanka, who writes, "Thank you, Judith, for this wonderful course. In my 5 years of practicing yoga, no teacher has given my head or neck or legs support in Shavasana. What is the reason that active practice teachers don't usually provide that support? Should we always be practicing supported Shavasana? Or are there benefits to practicing the, quote, standard lying flat on the ground Shavasana?"
Thank you for your question. And I will begin by saying I have no idea why anybody does what they do. I barely know why I do what I do. So my way of answering this question is to tell you why I do like the use of propping. And I will say it has become, for me, not an alternative way of looking at Shavasana, but a very important way to use the props. I would rather teach you Shavasana with the props first, and I'll tell you more about that in a moment, and then teach you the classic lying on the floor flat. Because what I tell my teacher trainees, I say, then I trust you. I know that you understand how exquisitely important our relationship with the floor is, because where the pressure is on the body and how you interact with space, the spaces at the back of your ankle and your lower back, etc., and how you interact with the pressure and the feeling of the floor underneath you, and all of that is sending subliminal messages to your nervous system. So I prefer to teach Shavasana with props. What I believe is happening when we set ourselves up the way we suggested in our video is that you're putting all the joints in flexion. Your cervical spine, your neck is in flexion, your lumbar is in flexion, thoracic somewhat, your wrists, your elbows, your hips, your knees, ankles, everything is being held in slight flexion. And I think that's important for two reasons. The first is when we sleep, we tend to be in flexion. You may start out lying on your back, spread out, but almost everyone sleeps by curling up and going into flexion, because that position in the joints, through the proprioceptors in the joints, the position sense nerves in the joints, feeds back into the nervous system that this is a position of ease. You don't have to keep the legs straight to hold yourself upright. You can bend your knees with no muscular action, and it's relaxing. And I think the second part of it is I think it relates to the fact of the position we have in the womb. when we're inside our mother and we're curled in flexion, there is from our very, very beginning an association with flexion and relaxation and safety. And often what you'll find is that when you're wanting safety or ease, you want to curl inward. So I suggest that you use the props until they begin to feel normal to you, and you really find your experience of Shavasana becoming more subtle and more sophisticated, and you're knowing your body more. How, for example, you always tend to hold your left leg in a little bit towards the midline and not let it be exactly even, and how the weight on the heels can be slightly different, and how your back ribs on one side go down more than the other, and what needs to happen about that. And when you have really practiced that for a while, then go back and try lying flat and see if you can recreate the head position, resting on the mid-sacrum, exactly extending the heels very slightly to open the Achilles tendon, and all the details that we learn from the propping. And I'm guessing you will then have the freedom to do Shavasana in any way. If you're in a class that doesn't use props, you can find that space again that you've grown to love through practicing with this method.
I like that idea. They're almost like the props become training wheels for us to learn how to relax.
Mm-hmm.
So, as I said, we got so many questions, and thank you to everyone who submitted questions in case we don't get to all of them. What I thought I would do, Mom, is group the questions and read you a couple at a time, and you can see where they lead you.
Okay.
The next three are about the mind. So Laura writes, I'm gaining so much from this intensive. I've been using it to support me with my resolution to develop self-discipline and consistency. I'm coming to understand what I have been missing is compassion, comfort, and enjoyment. My question is, on days when you feel very agitated, apart from a brisk walk, what other things can you recommend to prepare yourself for stillness?
Thank you for that question.
Wait, I want to read you two more.
I'm sorry.
Liza in Paris, France writes, every now and then in my Shavasana, I can go very deep. I think I go to a very deep part of myself that rarely gets touched. Then, all of a sudden, I get scared. I almost feel claustrophobic and need to hurry back to the surface of my consciousness to touch base with reality. What is this deep falling into a hole sensation? What am I scared of? And lastly, Michael writes, I feel I'm practicing, quote, mindfulness meditation while in the pose and not pranayama or centering breathing. Is this okay? Is one way more relaxing than the other?
Let's take the last question first. I suggest some conscious breathing at the beginning of your Shavasana, which will help curtail the agitation that was mentioned in the first question as well. But then I recommend letting go of trying to control the breath. Shavasana is remembering the present. It's the conscious choice to remember the present, because we forget the present, and the breathing always lives in the present. You can't breathe for tomorrow. You can't make up and breathe for yesterday. You can only breathe in the present. So I recommend some breathing in the beginning, which will bring you into the present and therefore reduce your agitation. But once you've done that and you start to feel yourself slipping into it, then just let the breathing find its own intelligence and just rest deeply within the vastness of your own being. And the second question about claustrophobia or emotional reactions in general, these are not unusual. And I have a couple of ideas about that. One is, I truly believe that feeling of claustrophobia or fear, anxiety, or sadness that may be coming up is in us. It's already spinning in the background. It's like when you're in a busy city in your apartment or your house and you're focused on something. You don't hear the street noise. But when you widen your awareness and stop your activity, suddenly you hear the train, the trolley going by, or the traffic on the street. So part of what's happening, I think, when these strong emotions arise is that we're giving them permission. That part of what we're doing when we enter deeply into our own silence is giving permission to ourselves to begin to let those things come to the surface. So let me adamantly say, I don't believe Shavasana is creating those states. Those states are what we bring to the neutral palette. The colors we bring to the neutral palette of Shavasana can differ day to day. And you may one day bring agitation, one day bring sadness, one day bring this sense of fear or claustrophobia. So if it's dominating your practice, you need to elevate your head more. You need to elevate your upper body more and not be so flat. And if it really, really continues to bother you, I suggest you talk to someone about it who's trained in this. But it's not unusual for these things to arise. That's part of what the practice is. And I don't want us to believe that because we feel sadness arising or agitation of any kind arising that we're failing in our practice. There is no perfect Shavasana. There is this moment and the Shavasana that we experience. And our practice is to remember the present, to stay with the process, whether it's easy or hard, we like it or we don't. It's the consistency of standing and watching and being and loving ourselves. That is the Tadasana, is the bedrock of the practice. So don't feel that you're doing it wrong, quote unquote. Your process is unfolding exactly as your process is unfolding. And that stepping back and becoming the larger container to allow your process its own vicissitudes, its own inhales, its own exhales, its own ease, its own difficulty. Resistance is not the problem. It's our reaction to resistance, our unwillingness to accept resistance is part of who we are. So keep practicing, get some. If it's really extreme, I recommend you get some help from someone trained in dealing with emotions. But it's not a mistake or a failure. Thank you.
We got several questions about interruptions or places to practice. So I'll read a couple of them now. How does one practice when traveling, when you don't have the ease and comforts of home? That's from Anna. Irene in the Netherlands writes, I have enjoyed my practice Shavasana for 20 minutes every day. To be honest, I skipped one day. However, the real test challenge is next week when daily life starts again. Last week was still a holiday week. Next week, my daughter's school, my yoga classes, my job as a nurse can all distract me. And Ingrid writes, my question concerns the interruptions. Sometimes the background noises of family come unexpectedly and are obviously impossible to cut out entirely unless nobody is at home or all are asleep. Yesterday, this might have also been the reason not to find total relaxation, and when I am, my heart beats up terribly. I wonder whether the whole Shavasana is then spoiled.
All right. The travel question, you may need to prompt me on the questions, Liz. The travel question is, try to take with you a couple of blocks, yoga blocks. The foam ones are light. You'll take your mat, you'll have your mat, And you can usually, wherever you're staying, have a blanket or two. And you can use a blanket for your head, and then you can use the blocks under the knees and put a blanket on top so there's no sharp edges. There's also a prop that is a piece, especially probably easier for those of you in the United States. It's made by one of my students, and she takes different beautiful pieces of very sturdy material and adds a very strong zipper, and it's just a flat piece of fabric. It's exactly the right size that you can roll up 2 or maybe 3 blankets, probably 2, and then put that inside this material and roll it up and close the zipper, and you have an instant bolster. And all you have to travel with is this piece of material, which doesn't take up much room. It's not difficult. The thing I like to do when I'm traveling, if I don't have as many props as I want, I really find that I've gotten better and better at looking around the room where I am and saying, this chair, this cushion, oh, if I turn this chair upside down, I can use the back of the chair for my legs. Or I've become very inventive about it. And I notice that what my mind wants to do is use the lack of props as an excuse. Silence already lives in us. And what we're doing when we practice Shavasana is allowing it to grow. So no excuses. It's cold, practice. It's hot, practice. It's easy, practice. It's hard, practice. This is what is the most profound soul of discipline, is consistency. There was a president of the United States last century, Theodore Roosevelt, who said, do the best you can where you are with what you've got. So all of us are supporting you to do that. Now, what was the second one briefly, Liz?
What was this? It was about this idea of distractions. If a noise interrupts your Shavasana, do you consider it ruined? Do you start over? What is your relationship with distractions in your practice, Mom?
Let me tell you a story first. I was teaching once at a small center in Berkeley years and years and years ago. And we had just started doing Shavasana. And the house next door apparently caught on fire. And we could sort of smell it. And then pretty soon all these fire engines just started coming. I was a very new teacher. I think it was like my 3rd year of teaching. And I just pretended it wasn't happening. And I just kept teaching Shavasana. Let the arms unfurl like flags in the wind. And finally, it got ridiculous. So I just said, oh, forget it. And we all jumped up and ran to the window. So there are distractions. But generally, what I think of as a distraction now, when I'm telling myself or have the thought arising that I'm distracted, what I'm really saying is I'm attracted. Those sounds outside the room where we were practicing were deeply attracting us. And that's what's pulling us toward whatever's happening. And so if we don't want to be attracted, we now label it and judge it as a distraction. There is no quiet place. If you go in the woods far away from civilization, it's really noisy. The wind blows the trees. There's animal sounds and scurrying under the underbrush. And I mean, there is no quietness. There is no perfect place. So what I think is a useful technique is to notice the distraction and say, let me just be present with the thought of distraction. It's pulling me away from myself, and I'm just noticing that. Because every Shavasana is different. Because your body's different, your mind's different, your emotional state is different. And it's always, always, always about stepping back and including. The most advanced, well, let me say this way. In the beginning, yoga practice is about neti-neti. It's about excluding. It's about narrowing focus. And that's a necessary stage. But later, and I think it's actually, if I could judge it in this way, a deeper practice is to be inclusive. That all parts of myself, those I like and those I don't, those I know, those I don't, all parts of myself are included. Just as all parts of my body are included in Shavasana, all parts of my emotional self, my mental self, and the noise that's in my head and the noise that's outside my head are all included in this moment. And my job is to keep stepping back and making my circle bigger. So there is no other. There is no out there and in here. There is no line, demarcation, or division. There's just the radical present.
Thank you, Mama, for sharing your time with us and helping think through these questions that you've had a few years jump start on us. As we move towards closing, I want to ask you one more question, but before that, several people wrote about that they're having a little trouble with the specific blanket folding in the course, the Savasana Intensive course. So I want to point people toward your book, Relax and Renew, that has some great diagrams. And those blanket foldings match very closely to this course. So what we're calling in the Savasana Intensive Tadasana of the blanket is in that book called the Standard Fold Blanket. So find that book on your shelf, look at the diagram, and I think that will help you visualize it better.
I'd like to make another suggestion as well.
Mm-hmm.
Go to www.restorativyogateachers.com. And everyone on that website has been trained in my method, my crazy blanket folding methods. And you may be able to find someone near you who you might want to take a couple of classes with or consult with. They're all over the world. They're in Europe, they're in China, they're in South America, they're in, Far East, the Near East, the Middle East, they're everywhere. So Africa, they're all around, mostly in the United States and Canada, but still there are a lot of people from all over the world who've done the work. So that might help as well. Restorativyogateachers.com.
That is a perfect segue to our last question, Mama, which is from Susie from Denmark. Hi, Susie. She writes, it's about teaching. When students fall asleep in Shavasana, I sometimes let them sleep, assuming they may just be exhausted. But when a person repeatedly sleeps heavily, loudly snoring, I find it difficult. I have a male student who doesn't want to lie on his side, and he doesn't like to be propped up in supported reclining pose. I tell him to lie on with one forearm lifted, but he is able to fall asleep anyway. Any suggestions of what more I can do? So, Mom, I thought you could maybe address this question and perhaps more generally talk a little bit in closing about the relationship between Shavasana and sleep.
Let's do that first. Shavasana or relaxation and sleep are on the sort of the same side of the mental continuum. So many of the things that you do to prepare for relaxation are what you do for sleep. You're still, you're quiet, you're dark, you're warm, you're comfortable, you're in a safe environment, all your horizontal thing which has an effect on the nervous system. So many of the things that you do to sleep, you do to rest. It's just a matter of degree. And what we want in our students is for them to hover in the restful state and have an awareness of the restful state and let that restful state leave an imprint on the nervous system. Because you can sleep and not be rested. You can wake up and feel worse than when you went to sleep. So sleep and rest are distinct physiologic states, and we need both of them. And apparently this man has severe sleep deprivation. If he's snoring, he may have sleep apnea. He should be checked out by a doctor because that can be a very dangerous condition. and cause all kinds of stress on the body, even death. But we need to have sympathy for him because he gets anywhere near sleep, just the slightest hint to his body that he's going to relax, and it pulls him like a magnet into sleep. He cannot help it. So what if he's unwilling to change his position, like you say, Susie, then Susie, what I would do is I would find a way to talk to him briefly, privately, after class, or set up a phone call and say, I have two concerns about you in my yoga class. One is that you fall asleep so fast, I'm worried you're sleep deprived, blah, blah. I'll tell him about that. And I want you to understand that Shavasana is not sleep. It's another state that your body needs. And I really want your help. Very curious. Now, Susie, I'm using the wording I really suggest. I'm very curious about how you feel hearing this. And if you have a suggestion of a position in which you can be resting and not sleeping, and how we can work together towards finding that. The second point is I would tell him in your very sweet Susie way that part of the problem is the snoring you believe is loud enough that it's likely disturbing other people. And so you're curious about how you can work out this positioning so it prevents that, and which you believe will help him and the people around him. But I want to know what happens, so please let me know. I hope this helps you.
I like the idea of being curious, and I think can be mirrored not just for our students, but also for ourselves as we practice Shavasana in this 21-day experiment, Savasana Intensive, that we become more curious about this deeply transformative pose. So thank you, Mama, with your loud rustlings and bustlings in the background. I'm sending you a big namaste from India.
Namaste, Jesus, with your squeakings in the background.
So, for those of you still listening, www.lassiter.yoga. Go there, enroll now, Shavasana Intensive. It's magic. Bye.
Namaste.